to order the Wednesday, April 18th, 2018 Airport Advisory Board meeting. I'd like to begin the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Mrs. Lickle, would you conduct a roll call, please?
Shannon Stebbins.
Here.
Louis Worthy.
Here.
Dave McNary.
Here.
Steve Huff.
Here.
Brian Schultz.
Here.
Jeff Sayer, absent. Shannon Hicks.
Here.
Bill Boyer.
Here.
He's joining us by phone, Mr. Chairman. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks to all of you for coming. We appreciate your attendance. We'll open the proceedings with an initial call to the public. I'm just going to read this paragraph. We will now have an open call to the public for citizens wishing to address the board on issues within the jurisdiction of the board. Your comments must be limited to 5 minutes or less. If you wish to address an item already on today's agenda, you should wait until that item is announced for a public hearing. At the conclusion of the open call to the public, individual members of the board may respond to criticisms made by those who address the board, may ask staff to review a matter, or may ask that a matter be placed on a future agenda. However, board members cannot discuss or take legal action on matters not already on the agenda. Do we have anyone that would like to address the board? Please state your full name so Mrs. Lichtel can get it down.
She's got it already. My name is Mike McGee. I've got a home at 1924 Pima Drive North here in Lake Havasu. And I'm interested in building a hangar north of the north hangars that are currently there. 78, 79, continue on up and build hangar 80 or 81 or something. I understand the ground lease is 17 cents per month per square foot, and it just doesn't pencil to me. It doesn't seem to work, so I'm requesting that that be discussed or thought about, hopefully lowering it. Laughlin Bullhead's around 10 cents a square foot. Needles is 4 cents a square foot. Where I currently have my hangar in Inyokern, California, it's a penny a square foot. So I'm hoping that, Havasu can be more in the 7, 8 cents a square foot. But obviously, currently it's 17 cents a square foot. And by paying that much for a ground lease and building the hangar, it just doesn't seem to pencil out at all. That's it.
Sorry, our asphalt done. That was very nice. I had an incident at the hangar the other day. We were there. We were sitting around talking in my hangar. And the military helicopters came in and parked on the north side, which is fine. We enjoy it. But you guys own those hangars, and you need to know that they were kicking the rocks up. There's a strip of rocks between the curb on the back side and slamming them against the hangars. Those helicopters brought it up and made a mess. So, not that it was bad, it was, but I could hear them slamming against there. So, that's the first thing. The next thing I want to bring up, it's time to consider that we will never have an airline here again, most likely, at least not in the foreseeable future. And we need to bring to discussion the repurposing of the terminal building. I believe I go fly into other airports and I see they have areas for people to be outside along the, close to the airplanes or somewhere where they can enjoy. And I think there's opportunity there to turn that whole asphalt area or something into something usable, maybe something that we can rent out as a conference room. There's a lot of options, but I think that we need to get it on the agenda to bring it up for discussion on how we can repurpose that building and make better use of it. And those are my 2 items for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments they'd like to make? Any board members want to make any comments? Staff would have to look into request for proposal or adjustments to the ground lease, so that would be up to you. As far as the repurposing of the terminal goes, I would submit to you that that's one of the purposes of the master plan that we're getting ready to spend a whole lot of money on. So I think we probably should wait until, that's just my opinion. Okay, this concludes the call to the public. The first item of business is approval of the March 21st, 2018 meeting minutes. I would entertain a motion to approve or any corrections.
I move that we approve those minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Any opposed? Unanimously approved, Mrs. Lickman. Communications, announcements, and airport supervisor's report is item 6. 6.1 is the airport supervisor's report. I'll turn it over to Steve for that.
All right, I'll be a little long-winded as usual. The electrical vault was delivered on March 23rd. The CCNRs are on site as well. The project will restart on Monday, the 23rd of this month. Best guess right now is completion in 3 to 4 weeks. Work will be performed during daylight hours, and we're not anticipating any major inconvenience to normal airport operations. Banner tow operator was here a couple weeks ago, was successful with spring break, no major safety issues there. 3/4 of taxiway Alpha has been crack sealed, which you all have noticed out there at the airport after a number of years of no crack sealing. The north ramp was seal coated, as Tom pointed out a couple weeks ago. The north ramp lavatory was placed, so we have a temporary lavatory just next to Tom's hangar up there. The AOPA Rusty Pilot Seminar was held at the terminal on March 24th. That was very successful. EAA the next weekend on the 31st did Young Eagle flights, which were conducted at the airport, and that also was successful. I think there were 50+ kids that were flown, if I remember right. We have a Travel Air biplane out at the airport giving rides based on the event that's occurring this weekend. He's based out of Desert Skies. We conducted an airport tour for our finance department on April 4th. Construction is ongoing for the D2 hangars. I believe steel will arrive in the next few days for those. They're working on foundations as we speak. EAA will have their monthly meeting this Saturday at the airport. That's Experimental Aircraft Association. The rejuvenation of taxiway connectors for the runway, that's connectors 2 through 6, should be scheduled relatively shortly. More hangar inspections will be scheduled as well. That's in process. The FOD project has been awarded. Contracts are being signed as we speak. The current guess is the project will begin in about 3 to 4 weeks. And again, it'll probably take about a month for that to take place, and there will be some runway closures since what they're working on is right adjacent to the runway. We'll see if we can't schedule some of that work at night. FAA will be scheduling an ACIP trip meeting, we hope, if they get the okay to use the state's airplane. That'll be mid to late July, either here or in Phoenix. And right now, the plan is to have, along with the Mr. Clark back there, the normal suspects, as well as the city manager and Mr. Stebbins attend that meeting. FAA is gathering additional funds for the master plan. We expect a grant offer in August. A month after that, that project should kick off. The next major grant project from a construction standpoint will more than likely be Taxiway Alpha. Given some of the recent FAA requirements in the last couple of years, we're figuring that the costs that we've estimated in the past will double. And the project will probably take 1 year to do the design work, and then another 2 years to actually do construction. It'll be divided in 2 pieces because it'll be a rebuild of that taxiway, not just an overlay. The airport will be conducting soil cores on taxiway Alpha just to verify the poor pavement condition. And we already have a visual report from ADOT, but basically this is gilding the lily, so to speak, to get the FAA to pony up some significant grant dollars beyond what we're normally used to. The airport business locator signs, you'll start to notice those being traded out. They're quite faded, and so we are going to redo some of those. Staff is looking into a simplified statement of interest for a hangar project on the north ramp, in addition to what was just mentioned in regards to questions on lease rates. And I'll bring something back at the next meeting that deals with the lease rate. And we'll have some staff discussions internally at the city to see where we want to go with that. We're looking into a recorder for the Unicom radio. Given some non-standard radio transmissions we've had at the airport, we figure that once we have a recorder in there and a way to store those messages, that some of those interesting radio calls will probably evaporate on their own. In the past months, the tie-down ramps have been full of aircraft, which a number of you have mentioned or noticed, and you'll see some photos here on the screen of some of the airplanes that have been transitioning through. Of course, the crack ceiling on a piece of taxiway Alpha, the north ramp seal coat that Mr. Stokely was mentioning, the north ramp temporary restroom. And then again, we've had a lot of military traffic coming through, going to Fort Irwin. We're guessing the last group was probably about 25 helicopters. Every time there's a high wind alert, they book out of Fort Irwin and come to Lake Havasu. On average, probably about 5 helicopters have been broken down and worked on. So when you start figuring fuel, hotel rooms, all of that together, we're guessing about $100,000 just with these uses has been generated for the community. And then last week, maintenance staff and myself responded to a gear up landing, a bonanza out at the airport, and maintenance did a really good job. It was sort of a classic mess where the FAA had just changed their phone numbers and moved to a different city up in Washington State. So it took us a little longer, but we hammered through it. And that's all I have.
Questions or comments from the board members?
So the north ramp, you're talking about the RFP you brought up, I think it was 2 meetings ago is what you're saying. So hopefully for the next meeting, you'll have some more information about people that want to submit a proposal for that.
I believe at this point the city wants to take a little more conservative approach. Instead of doing an RFP off the get-go, I think what we'll do is something that's a little more informal, statements of interest that don't require the amount of background work and effort to put together to get an idea of what the market's like. And then from there, we'll get into an RFP.
Do you have a timeline on when we could put something together? And I mean, if we have people that are ready to commit funds and build hangars, now's the time to get this out.
Yeah, I've been
So
working on it, so hopefully I'll have something and send it down to the city for a look-see and review prior to our next meeting.
Any other comments? I'd like to echo the sentiments that were expressed for Mark Clark for making the resale on the north ramp a reality. That certainly was necessary for safety and for maintenance of aircraft, and it's with his efforts that this was brought to fruition, so we appreciate that. The Young Eagles flew 54 kids on Saturday the 31st of March, and we will, as soon as if we sense that there's more interest, we can have another one in October. So failing that, it'll be the following March or early February, March timeframe. So if anyone has children between the ages of 8 and 17 that would like to take a free airplane ride, get a hold of either staff at the airport or me, and we'll make it happen. Okay, the next items are item 7.1 is a public hearing. Presentation and discussion of airport budget comparison, the current fiscal year 17-18 budget and as compared to the fiscal year 18-19 budget. Do we have anybody in the audience that would like to address the board on this subject? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Steve, could you give us an overview of this?
Certainly. You'll note a detached spreadsheet which delineates both fiscal years. It's not a standard, I think as you've seen, Chairman, a standard budget that we typically have. We grouped a number of these items together basically to simplify them as opposed to going through line item by line item. And again, thanks to Mark Clark and operations, we've been able to reinvest both airport and city funds this year. This is sort of a first for us in a number of years in major maintenance items, which we just mentioned, which we have examples in your memo there. Some of the items we are currently planning on for next year tied to repainting a number of edge lines for Alpha Taxiway, the majority of the center line in the southern portion of the central ramp, and about 25 tie downs. And then if there's additional funds that we have available, removing the underground airport fuel tanks, which we've been told are problematic given their age. They're not leaking, but it's just once something like that's 20 years old, you rip it out and get rid of it because it becomes a major liability. The other aspect is a stormwater plan for the airport. And then the other piece to this too is thanks to Mark Clark's help, the money that you see that's approved for projects, which would be engineering, architectural, others, that's what we had budgeted. We went way over that number, but again, that came out of another city department for these projects that we just did. And in fact, the connector projects, which we have yet to do for the runway, again, a large part of that's being helped by Mark Clark's division. So based on that, any questions on what you see on the budget?
Any comments from anyone? Let me just call your attention to the first item, which is airport staffing. It shows 195,000, 196 roughly for last year, and 350,000 for this year. That doesn't represent a dollar change. It represents an organizational change. It's 2 employees that are transferred back to the airport budget that were being funded by Mr. Clark's division in the last year. The question I have is the same question I had this time last year. The percentages that are being taken out of the airport fund to reimburse city departments, I don't see any of that on here, and I need that information. Mr. Clark.
Thank you. Yeah, didn't want to really get into any specifics on that, but we can in the future. But there was about a $50,000 reduction in what they were charging. There's been some reallocations, so we can get you that information related to that. A lot of it was IT went up, city council, city clerk, city manager's office went almost to zero kind of thing, so there's some of that going on. Also, just be advised that obviously it's an estimate kind of thing. So for example, in early years, the history, this is from 16, 17, didn't show some costs that probably should have been there for engineering because they were performing some functions and they weren't charging. Same thing with procurement. So some of it's catching up right there. But basically it dropped from about $180,000 of interfund transfer to about $140,000. And then that's kind of the most part of it. And then we did have the discussions with the city manager and the finance staff, and they are comfortable with their allocation processes, but obviously they did make some changes, so I don't know if they updated some numbers and that resulted in those things, because they were all based on activity in front of the council or percentages of those kinds of things. But again, we could be happy to get some little bit more information to you and maybe have a side discussion too.
I'd like to do that. My comments this time are just like last time. I can't tell you factually whether or not the FAA will buy off on percentages. But what I can say is that if they do, that it's all got to be backstopped.
Yeah, and we have made that point to the people higher up in our chain of command, and obviously that's what we can do. But yeah, I'd be happy to go down that discussion with you.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay, the next item is 7.2, presentation and discussion of airport pre-accident plan. This was something that was requested several months ago. Jeff Sayer has been working on the issue. He's not here tonight because of business commitments in Phoenix, but he has drafted an initial plan, and Steve is working on the additions to it. The idea of this is so that, for example, we had a Bonanza that departed a couple of weeks ago. He had a loss of power at X amount of feet and did not have time to get the gear down, so the airplane was on the runway. When it's on the runway, we've got Steve and the airport staff to take care of the proper notifications, et cetera, et cetera. But if that same accident or incident occurs on Chemehuevi or some other place within the city's jurisdiction, we need to have a plan in place that spans the fire department, the police department, and all city departments, so that we are confident that that same notification process is taken care of, and that if the NTSB wants the wreckage preserved, that we do that, all those things. So this is a public hearing. I'd like to open it this time for comments. Anybody in the audience? Seeing none, we'll close it. And with the board's permission, I'd like to table this until next month, when Mr. Sayer can be here to present any objections to that. Let's move on. Do you have anything else to add, Steve?
I do not.
Presentation and discussion of rate determination study of city hangars. I'll turn that over to you as well.
Again, this is one item that I did not get to. As we brought up, I think in August of last year, if I remember correctly, it's been a while, our hangar rates here are higher than many of the other airports around us. Have not had the opportunity to contact other airports and do any kind of in-depth study that would give you an idea of the infrastructure they have, their funding sources, and other things of that nature, all of which gets you into the weeds detail-wise, but would give you an idea of why things are the way they are here.
I have a copy of, this was presented, I think, 8/9/17, and it takes into account Goodyear, Deer Valley, Marana, Chandler, Bullhead, Lake Havasu, and Sedona, Falcon Mesa. Goodyear 16 cents a square foot, Deer Valley 22, Chandler 16, Bullhead 16, Lake Havasu 28, Sedona 17, and Falcon Mesa 22 as well. So this was a genesis for this report generated the questions from the board and from the public to take a look at a rate study. So this is a public hearing. Let me open it up to anybody in the audience that would like to make a comment.
Those numbers you just gave, that's for a built hangar, correct?
Those are for city-owned hangar rentals, right?
The whole hangar, so not just
Correct. Yeah. If there are no other comments, I'll close the public hearing. And from my standpoint, I'd like to, I know that we're in a crunch for personnel and other things, but we'd be glad to help you do that.
I'll take you up on that.
Okay. Mr. Clark?
Couple things. Obviously, we're busy doing the budget and all that other good stuff and sealing air runways and taxiways and those things. The other thing is the city's process time-wise is really the MSI. This kind of stuff happens after the budget's over, like August timeframe. So that's why the other part, we weren't in any really hurry, because it doesn't do him any good to get that information, because the city's finance MSI process is gonna go as a part of its regular thing. So that's part of the dynamics, is we can start gathering that stuff, but it really will be a part of that formal review of all, fees and structures. And again, I think it ended in October or last year maybe, or then when they finally adopted it. So we have that time frame. As long as we have that information to feed into that system, we'll be okay.
I appreciate your comments and understand that. However, this is something that's been a major discussion items of the tenants at the airport, and I'm looking at some here that have brought it up on numerous occasions. So we still want to be responsible to the public and be able to have this public process, notwithstanding the time it takes to put this together. So I appreciate your comments on that.
Yeah, and I mean, realistically, like I said, that'll be a part of that process with them. It's just that, again, it doesn't do us any good to gather that information too early and then have it change before their September, kind of August timeframe or whatever. But like I said, it becomes the next crisis in the process. So thank you.
Any comments? With the board's permission, I'd like to again table this to next month, and hopefully we have some facts and figures. And then we're going to have some serious discussions of how we handle whatever we come up with. Any objections? Item 7.4 is again a public hearing, and it's a presentation and discussions of the pavement condition report. And I'll turn that over to you for the briefing on the report.
I think briefly a meeting or two ago mentioned that we'd gotten the ADOT report in regards to pavement conditions out at the airport. They've now been doing this for at least 5 or 6 years, so we have a good track record. One year they actually had a thumper out here, which gives you a better sense of the condition of the pavement. The majority of these visits have been visual, where they spend a day or two out here basically looking at all the pavement. So we believe that there's consistency there. 60% of the airport pavement per industry standards, which is a pavement condition index of 55. At 55 for airports, that's failure. Other places, say in the city, that might not be a public roadway, but with airports, they're different. The areas that haven't failed, the north ramp, not the area that we seal coated, Tom, but the rest of the north ramp, is in the medium range. The runway, which you've all heard my tale of woe about, sort of a project from hell and back, it's at anywhere from 65 to 63 pavement condition index, PCI. And again, it's only been there 4 years. And that's not the way those numbers go. And they're logarithmic. So when they get to 63, by the next time we have a report, they will have failed. So that sort of ties into what I was saying earlier about on the CIP for the airport. The first thing we'll end up doing is taxiway alpha. And given the newer rules about the right angles with the connectors to the runway, those all have to be dug up right down to the base. All the lights have to be moved. All the electrical lines have to be moved. All the signs have to be moved. And that's not just Havasu, that's everywhere, which is going to bump the project up. And again, on taxiway alpha, right now the guesstimate with all of that I'm talking about, you're probably talking about a total design and construction of about $8 million, which gets us into a whole different dynamic with grants. What the FAA is going to have to do is go to bat for us and take money from some of the air carrier airports to fund this, because it's way beyond what we normally get. We typically get $150,000. That's entitlement grants. What we're talking about now is discretionary and state apportionment as well. So in that vein, the FOD project will have a coring outfit laboratory that comes out and cores out between Alpha and the runway at the north end. we are going to utilize them when they're here and get 5 corings on Alpha. And basically, when we have our CIP meeting with the feds and the state, share that information with them. Again, that's on us. They will not reimburse us for any of this, but basically it's proving to them the payment's failed, we need your help, and also showing that we're ahead of the game and we're serious. And at least what I've been told so far is that should work for us. And again, FAA is already aware of it. They've already gotten a copy of our CIP, and I've talked to them on the phone, so this won't be a surprise for them. But we'll have a better handle on total cost probably here in the next month or two before we get into a CIP meeting. And again, we're really going to need their help to go down this road. But right now the thought is, unless the FAA changes priorities, and they tend to do that about every year, we go in with a list, and we're lucky if a quarter of it remains the same. And again, since they're giving us the money, we won't argue. But right now it looks like Alpha, and then after that, the next major construction project will be the runway. So any questions?
This is a public hearing, so anybody in the audience would like to make a comment? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing.
Actually, I've got a question.
Go ahead, Dave.
On the runway, is there any recourse for the city to go back after the contractors because it was improper or whatever?
I see Mr. Clark rising.
Yeah, well, and actually I could probably answer this if...
Yeah, but I don't want us to get in trouble. The reality of it is we were the recipient of the grant and recipient of the actions, and we did what we could to notify and alert, but we weren't the responsible party for any of those things, and so we can just kind of use that information. I think Steve has done that very succinctly and professionally by letting them know that, hey, you need to fix this, and that's in the pipeline. So, I mean, realistically, we have the window that we're not happy with it now, but it's really the trigger for the overlay that's coming. So we should be okay. But yeah, there's, it's just one of those things where you can't, they recognize they needed to do something, and that's why their project's in line. And I don't think us raising that level of concern any higher or beating somebody up or trying to would have resulted in a better outcome. I think we got what we can, best we can get, and I think that'll be satisfactory.
Thank you.
I'll add to that. The other piece we got was another $230,000 in the FOD grant, which deals with one of those problems. So the state recognized they goofed up. They will never admit it. And since they're giving you money, you have to treat them very respectfully. And when we have our CIP meeting, I have a little lunch pail with some crumb cake, as I call it, piece of pavement that's falling apart. And we do show and tell. They get it, and they understand. They understand.
So those of you that are in the audience know, we just talked about a runway, which doesn't appear too bad to us. We just talked about a taxiway, which doesn't appear too bad to us. But we look outside our hangar, and in Tom's case on the north ramp, had Mr. Clark not put that overseal on, that pavement had failed. But for the rest of you, you have to be careful where you walk because of the cracks. So we have an uphill battle because we're talking now 5 or 6 years in the future, and we haven't even talked about ramps. We haven't talked about replacing any of that asphalt at the federal expense. So our challenge is to come up with budget monies that will allow us to seal those, backfill them, whatever, and make that pavement last for probably another 10 or 12 years, which is going to be a monumental undertaking. As far as the total budget goes, I'd like to make one other point. When I first looked at the budget 2 years ago, probably 3, it appeared that the city was putting in about $660,000 plussing up the airport budget to make the airport fund be able to take care of itself. That's probably that's probably not real dollars. It's probably closer to 80,000 real dollars that the city's putting back into the airport to make our airport enterprise fund balance. But what the city is getting for that is an impact on the economy that's $30 million plus a year. So it's for those of us that are taxpayers here in the city, that's a very small amount of money for what it's buying the total community. And I think sometimes that's lost. And one of the products of the airport master plan is to have an official estimation of the airport impact. The master plan that was just completed at Flagstaff was north of $200 million a year that Flagstaff puts into the local economy. Now, we don't have scheduled air service, and I agree with Mr. Stokely that we're not going to have it in any time foreseeable future in my lifetime. But what we do have is an airport that generates a tremendous amount of economic impact for everyone here. It maintains jobs. It just keeps, it's part of the mechanism that makes Lake Havasu a vibrant community. So I think that's all I have to say. Anybody else?
If you question that, just head out there tonight or tomorrow and look from Desert Storm how many private jets are out there, helicopters and everything that have come in the last day or so. Yesterday, Harley was here with their big jet for the proving grounds. I mean, it's definitely busy.
Mr. Boyer, do you have any comments? Maybe he's not still there. That concludes the public hearings. The next item is future agenda items. I've just written down a couple of notes here. Obviously, in response to the call to public at the beginning, I'd like to have the status of a statement of interest or an RFP on the agenda for next month. And I'm not suggesting that we have to wait till next month for you to do something. I would invite you to get with Steve and see what it takes for you to, you're welcome to put your own proposal into the city at any time, I think. I turn it over to the board members for any other things that need to be on the future agenda.
I would like to ask one question, backing way up about the storage tanks. I assume those are fuel storage tanks, and are they still in use?
They have not been in use for the last 2 years.
And do we know how much fuel is left in them?
We have an approximation, probably about 1,000 gallons in a couple and maybe 3,000 gallons in another. And we're already in the process of researching firms that can pump the fuel out, which begs the next question of the FBO, is the fuel usable? No. And the aviation fuel actually probably could be. The Jet A sometimes will grow algae, and then we go from there.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Just as a note, it's my understanding that all that fuel that, while the city owns the tanks, the fuel is owned by one of the FBO vendors. So we have the airport pre-accident plan that will be on next month's agenda, and for sure to talk more about the RFPs and the statement of interest to get that out. Now, I agree with Mr. Schultz that now is the time to get this stuff out. People have some disposable income, and it's time for them to make some investments. Let me go around and ask again, is there any other comments anyone on the board would like to make? If there's nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Yeah, you have a second, sir.
Without objection, we are adjourned.